Hi, everyone. Bill Pelster here, coming to you from Cultivate and looking forward to a conversation around skills. I have an opportunity to meet a lot of folks around the world in my role as the co founder of the Josh Burson Academy. We're an organization that's really focused on talent, HR, and learning topics and really helping HR and business leaders understand these really complex topics. Today, we're going to be talking about one of the most interesting topics out there, and that's this evolution of skills and what's really changing. And I have the opportunity to be joined by a good friend today. And Lewis, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Bill. Yes, thank you. Hi, everybody. Excited to be here. My name is Luis Nino. I am the digital portfolio manager for HR for Chevron Corporation. Really happy to talk to you about this topic, Bill.
Yeah, Luis, what's really fascinating about this, in our role as researchers, we've been following this evolution of skills for many, many years, right? And a few years ago, we started to identify a trend that the half life of a skill was collapsing right in front of us. It was maybe good for 5 years. And when our parents grew up, when they had a skill, it may last an entire lifetime, right? And so as we've looked at this problem, it's become really, really challenging. And I have to tell you, I've been so excited to see all the changes in the processes that have been going on from having to do these things kind of manually to being able to use AI and tools and technology to really solve those problems. And I think you've really been doing some innovative work here to move this forward. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, thank you. And you're absolutely right. There is a frenetic pace in the skills management space for HR that has really upended some of the traditional work that we've done in HR as a function. Our journey in Chevron started not necessarily with skills. We were looking at different capabilities to apply digital transformation to our function in HR. And maybe we can dive into what that means a little bit later. But to answer your question, we arrived at a point where we understood that skills were going to be the foundational piece or the foundational data point that will drive most, if not all, of the HR workflows going forward. And this will be highly leveraging digital technologies, in particular things like big data and artificial intelligence. Of course, these are topics that while AI has been around for a long time, not until recently have we understood how to apply it in this space.
Yeah, no, it's really fascinating because we have the privilege of talking to a lot of different companies out there, and pretty much every HCM vendor in the world is looking at skills in some way, shape, or form, and they're all approaching it from different directions. I'm just thrilled that we're having this conversation around skills and really understanding what's happening here. What's funny, one of the big changes inside of organizations is that this used to be a project that you would do maybe every couple of years. You would work with an external vendor, they'd come in, you'd get a team together, you'd set up the surveys, you try to do the job architecture, you'd build the competencies. That really is old school. Nowadays, has to be living and dynamic. So I really see this as moving from like a project that people have done to really a continuous process. What's kind of your thoughts on that?
The reality is that this has been a process that we've put together, obviously manually, because that was what was available to us. But what that created were several inefficiencies in the way that we understood skills. And if you think of skills as a tag or a signal for individuals, let's say, we as humans are learning all the time, whether we want it or not. Hopefully organizations want to build a learning culture, but even if they don't, people are still learning all the time. And so this effort to maintain skills and capabilities became obsolete in a matter of days or weeks, right? And so you're right, companies used to have these major projects where they had a group come in and build a job architecture and understand job profiles and tag skills to those job profiles. And then a month later, that was all old. This idea that you can now change the way you work, which is the promise of digital transformation, by leveraging artificial intelligence and maintaining a live, real-time, self-sustaining ontology and intelligence when it comes to skills. This is the promise of dynamic workflows and the opportunity to drive not only the job architecture and job profile side, but other workflows in HR, like for example, recruiting, I mentioned learning, career progressions, even payroll and benefits at times, if you can get to understand what are those skills and competencies that make part of that ontology, you can probably affect for the benefit of the employee as well.
I think you're actually touching on one of, several probably key takeaways in my head when I think about skills. And that is, as you start to look at building this dynamic skills environment and really trying to understand how it's impacting your workforce and thinking strategically about it, this is not just done in a box. This involves the business leaders in the organization, the owners of employees with those skills. It involves so many components of HR because you hit it. How does this impact learning? How does this impact leadership development? How does it impact succession? Do we build the talent? Do we buy the talent? Can talent acquisition find it? Are they finding legacy skills or the emerging skills? How do we go do this? So this ends up being a really complex topic really quickly. And if you don't think about it in totality, you're probably missing some opportunity. What's kind of your thoughts on that? What have you experienced so far at Chevron?
I think you. This is probably the most important of of the lessons that we've gathered in the past months or years, I would say, which is you have to start with the why. Why are you doing this, and why are you pursuing these opportunities to leverage skill ontology and advanced technologies? You don't do it just because it's fun. And I'm an IT person and I'm a nerd at heart, so I love fun stuff. But you can't pursue this in a vacuum. If you don't connect it also to business objectives, the change management effort, the behavioral change management effort, which is probably the hardest piece of this all, is not going to be successful. People need to understand, people being leaders in the organization, but also employees need to understand what's in it for them in going in this direction.
Yeah, no, and it's fascinating the conversations we're seeing happening across a variety of industries. And I want to clear up one kind of mystique, right? There's a little bit of mystique out there that all this really AI-driven skills capabilities is for only the leading edge, high-tech workers out there, maybe your engineers. And I have to tell you, what I've experienced is, yes, that is true. But it's just as applicable to people in retail. What's the retail job of the future? How am I going to be the truck driver of the future? Product managers for consumer products companies. How does my role need to evolve, and how do I think about the new skills and capabilities that I need? Are you seeing the same thing from your lens?
Absolutely, we are. The reality is this: AI has been, and big data have been around for a long time. In our business, when you're thinking about our business out on the field, we use time series data to track most of our workflows, if not all of them, and make sure that we have the operational efficiency safeguards in place, because we're a highly regulated company and we also place safety above everything else. And so some of these concepts from a technology side we've been using for decades. It's only now that we've explored the opportunities to expand them, to understand skills and to understand the HR space from an enhanced perspective, right? We have come to see that we can use many of the similar practices when it comes to technology engineering in the HR space that we've used on our business. So you're right, this is enabling us to transform the function, and in turn enabling us to transform other areas, or it will help us transform other areas of our business. As a large corporation, we have upstream, we have downstream, we have midstream, which are very different businesses. More recently, we came out with the communication about our new organization called Chevron New Energies. And so that's a perfect space where we need to understand what are those emerging skills that we need to bring into the table to make sure that we are meeting the objectives of our low carbon strategy, right? And that's something that we can look at in-house if we want to build, or we can go and buy if we want to leverage talent acquisition. But in both cases of, let's call it the use of that talent market, we are relying on skills to be able to make the right decisions.
Yeah, that's fascinating because when I have conversations around doing this type of work and using the latest technology to really understand, and by the way, we're in the early stages here, so I don't want to give the impression that this is all solved, that it's done and we can check the box.
Right.
This is, the beginning of trying to figure out how to go to the moon and solve some of these really complex problems. But what's interesting is there's actually kind of two layers that I'm seeing, from the analysis. One is strategically from the enterprise level, right? So we as an L&D organization, we as an exco or a board, where do we need to invest to move the organization collectively in a direction we need to go, right? So own from the center, driven out, part of business strategy. But the other level, and in some ways I actually find this more interesting, is the individual level. So finally, individuals being able to see like, oh, if I'm interested, that's how my job is changing. I've always been a product manager for this candy bar, but now I need other capabilities like data analytics and maybe, some social media skills to be able to drive my product in the marketplace. I better develop myself if I want to stay competitive. Are you seeing the same thing, or do you have a different perspective on that?
I think the way we look at this is, so this would be what I consider to be the second vector of change, if you will, when we look at this space. We basically have looked at, recently in the past couple of years, we've looked at three main vectors of change in Chevron. The first one being the energy transition. So I spoke a little bit about this new energies organization and how we need to think about the emerging skills and how we grow that business to make sure we continue on the focusing on low carbon energy. The second vector of change was the pandemic, of course. It really forced us to change the way we think about skills, about what are the most important skills, particularly in remote settings. Some of our people never left our production environments and our field and their refineries, but many people were working remotely. So building this hybrid reality and realizing what are those skills that we need to maintain, that was something that we and everybody else in the world needed to do really, really fast. And so to your point, understanding individual skill set and how you can grow, it was sort of thrown on us. But the third vector of change, which I think is really important, is there has been in the past few years this shift in employee and leadership expectations. I think from an employee perspective and a leadership perspective, we expect organizations to have, for example, increased levels of empathy. You expect leaders to become servant leaders, right? And make sure that they are working to remove roadblocks for employees, that they are leading with empathy and making sure that people understand their purpose, provided with autonomy, etc. For leaders who are entering the space, or for leaders who have been doing this for a long time, this is a shift in practice, and they also need to upskill. So these vectors of change are coming from different angles to the individual, but they're all directed at the same thing, which is make sure you remain valuable to the organization, make sure you remain competitive, and make sure that your professional value is as continuous as your ability to learn that curve, right? And so these systems, what they do is they allow you to do that in a quantitative way almost.
No, that's fascinating. And one of the case studies that I was exposed to was some analysis that, in this case, AFL did the analysis, right? And what's interesting is not only just looking at the skills, but this real subtle thing around what skills are accelerating in importance and which skills maybe are not, they're decelerating in importance, for lack of a better term. And it was interesting because one of the big, high-tech organizations out there that was really engineer-driven, they wanted to understand the learning spend on their engineers. And when they looked at it, if you just did a superficial analysis, when they compared themselves against benchmark companies out there, they basically said, hey, our engineers kind of have the same skills as the other engineers, so maybe we're doing okay. It wasn't until you double-clicked and took a look at what skills were accelerating and what skills were decelerating. And when you did that double click, the insight that they had was they were investing almost all of their L&D and developmental dollars on skills that were becoming less important, and they were not investing the money in the skills that were emerging and becoming more important. And the light bulb that sometimes has to go off and you get smacked upside the head on these things is you just can't do a superficial analysis. You really have to understand what's going on inside the skills. and whether those are, again, increasing in importance or potentially decelerating in importance. Any kind of aha moments for you on the beginning of your journey that you're willing to share with everyone?
Absolutely. There are so many of these use cases and these golden nuggets that you start uncovering as the data is made available, right? One of the things I was talking about with a friend a while ago was we've always had this incredible amount of data on our organization, on our people. They build their profiles, they have their external profiles in LinkedIn and whatnot. We've never been able to mine it and to transition it to insights and to decision making or information that can help us on the decision making path. As we've gone through this model and we've sort of installed this capability of talent intelligence, which is almost a new concept, to be honest, we have uncovered particular use cases. I remember a few months ago, we were going through a selection event and we were looking for engineers who had specific offshore capabilities, coupled with a few other skills that we were looking for a specific job. And we really didn't think that we had that in Chevron, which was surprising to many because the organizational knowledge felt like we had to have it. We just didn't know where. And so we went through our talent intelligence platform. We looked at what were the potential areas of skills. We did the research and we did find a good dozen or two people who could perform that job, right? Normally, we would have spent months and months through talent acquisition externally to bring in someone when, in fact, we had a quick win here, if you will, in bringing in people from Chevron who had the capability, and maybe they weren't fully there, but we could develop them. So that's the other end of how you balance this talent market, right? You have demand for a particular group of skills, and then you have the individuals who may be there or may not be fully there, but you understand that they can grow into that job. That's the other area that, many times, or I guess the other lesson that we had as we went through these processes, you can actually understand and be intentional when you're thinking of potential and of development with an advanced skill ontology.
And what's fascinating in this, and you can tell me whether it's confirmed in your experience in that particular example, but in other examples that I've been exposed to in the conversations I've had in different industries, when you start to identify those adjacent skills and you suddenly recognize that person X actually could do the job, that person didn't realize they could do the job. So if you just did a job posting, they actually wouldn't have applied because they would have self-discounted and go, no, I'm actually not qualified for that job. I've seen that many times. Did you see that internally also at Chevron?
We saw that more externally, actually. But we have seen it. And this self-declaration bias is something that the artificial intelligence, the discovery, and those adjacencies in skills, the inference of skills based on people's experience or education, you can mitigate that self-declaration bias. That's really important for us. For minorities, whether it be gender, racial minorities, this is a factor when looking for a job or when searching for opportunities. So the ability to for the system to uncover those things is helping not only the company, but it's also helping the individual, and it's making sure that we are improving, which is a forever effort, improving our diversity in the organization.
Yeah, no, I'm curious because, that was research that we had done several years ago and started to identify and not out of any sort of, kind of menacing perspective that the systems and the structures did have a built-in bias to them, right? And it always produced a certain type of candidate, and so therefore it's always going to produce a certain type of candidate going forward. What has really got me excited about some of the new AI engines out there is the ability to discover that hidden talent, that talent pool that normally wouldn't volunteer, they normally wouldn't be on your radar screen. They exist in different kind of pools that we're just not looking at. Are you seeing a material difference there in Chevron by the ability to use AI to identify talent and then go target and recruit them?
We've uncovered use cases, yes. I think as we continue to grow in this space, we're going to see more and more of this. But I think you're right. Bill, the way you framed it is correct, because I don't think that those biases are in the system out of malice. We're humans, right? And so we've gone through this process identifying who we may think are the best candidates for a job, and that is a feedback situation where over and over we keep looking for the same person, and so we create bias, right? But with these systems, as you focus on skill sets and capabilities, and those are driven by the signals that you can infer from a person's experience and education, the aperture opens up, right? And so yes, we have found that we can access longer or a higher quality of candidate and a higher quantity of candidates when we're looking to fill a particular opportunity. Our experience or the use cases that we've had are more on the external side. But like I said, we've started doing some research and some analytics on use cases internally and have found the same thing.
Hey, I would love your perspective on this. What I've seen in some of the early talent systems that were out there, they actually weren't that smart, right? And so, if you didn't do a lot of work to kind of, invest hundreds and thousands of hours in kind of cleaning up your job architecture and helping set the system up for success in some of the traditional systems, you were going to struggle with any kind of skills engine. And then out of nowhere comes these AI engines, right? Where it really seems that you can have a messy structure and the AI can make some order out of that, right? Which absolutely just blows me away. I mean, I've been a consultant for over 20 years. I've dealt with the messiness, right? But the fact that the AI can go in and start doing this magic and start bringing relationships that I would never have been able to see without thousands of hours worth of work is absolutely incredible. And it actually opens up, if that is true, and I think it is, huge opportunities, and it removes almost any excuse for a company not to start going down this route. Are you seeing the same thing or something different?
Again, we were very lucky in that we've kept and we've maintained a lot of our data, right? So we had troves of data, but you're absolutely right. This opportunity to bring in advanced artificial intelligence that can make sense out of people's profiles, out of job profiles. Now, the reality is this, or at least from my experience, not all AI is created equal, and you have a lot of not so smart systems out in the market. So, a big lesson for us in this space has been to make sure that you dive into how the technology works, and you do that hand in hand with evolving your strategy, because you may find that you are buying a Lamborghini with a lawnmower engine, and then that doesn't do much for fixing that data that you're talking about. All right. And so if you do your homework and you get advanced artificial intelligence that can help make sense out of the skills, then yeah, I think you are finding yourself sort of correcting some of those data quality issues that for years held organizations back when it came to, particularly, I would say, the demand side of the equation of that talent market, figuring out how to write a job description. And I don't think I've seen a good job description ever in my life. Figuring out how people can understand that job description. Because if you think about the external market, asking a candidate to read a job description and understand what it means for that company and that culture, it's almost unfair in the sense that this person doesn't know. They've never been there. They're trying to get in the door. And so that context is very complicated. So the artificial intelligence taking the first steps to match those people to those opportunities is a huge step that we haven't been able to take before.
Yeah, and I'm curious, many organizations, have rolled some of this out, to targeted populations and some more broadly. And I can tell you, Josh and I were having this conversation just last week around talent marketplaces, and someone asked us, and it's like, should I do a talent marketplace? We don't know that much about it. And our comment was, every talent marketplace solution that we've seen implemented, employees love it. Whether you do it to a subset or to a large population, employees just gravitate towards this idea of being able to see what's available, understand, upskill. There will always be some that choose not to, but for the vast majority, it's really kind of a low-hanging fruit to make a huge difference inside the organization. Have you seen the same thing, and maybe a little bit about the scope of the work that you're doing?
We are seeing it. And we are, by the way, like you said, by no means are we done with this. We're going through these processes. We're learning. we are seeing the appeal of a talent marketplace for the organization. And I think if you are in a company that wants to put the employee in the driver's seat for their career, if you're wanting to empower them for growth, and growth doesn't necessarily mean a promotion or upward growth. It can mean through a lattice, right? Everyone will love the talent marketplace because it's putting all the tools necessary to achieve that, whether it's a new job or a project or a gig or learning experiences or mentoring or shadowing or whatever it may be. It puts it in front of you based on what you want and based on the skill gaps that you've identified for yourself. So, again, we've always talked about this is your career and we want you to drive it. Well, now we're giving you a beautiful dashboard that you can use to actually drive.
Yeah, and I'm curious, any thoughts on what you would do different in your journey so far? And I know you're really early in the journey, right? And I'll share some, after you go. But I'm wondering, any thoughts around if you had to do over? These are the lessons learned, and I might do it slightly different along the way here.
That's a great question. That's a great question. And yes, there are many, many lessons. We're still going through this. We're learning every day on how to approach this. Very transparently, Bill, the biggest challenge for us has been behavioral change management. The beginning of our conversation, I talked about digital transformation, and I guess I'll put a plug here for why I see that very differently than digitization, right? You and I, Bill, have talked about this in the past. When you digitize, you're basically converting into like your spreadsheet or your paper into a computer system or an application, but you're not really changing your workflows and the processes that your organization has, right? When you digitally transform, you're changing the way you do business. And you do it leveraging emerging technologies. In this case, big data, AI, right? Automation. And so from a behavioral change management perspective, that is a huge impact because you're asking the system to allow the technology to work hand in hand and drive changes to how you do your job, right? In the past, we didn't think of technology that way. We brought in tools, we call them tools, or we brought in solutions to fix a problem. We didn't bring in technology to transform how we work. We didn't bring in artificial intelligence, machines to do work, right? As part of the service models that a function like human resources may have, right? So one of the lessons for us, make sure you're paying attention to your behavioral change management. Make sure you're tying those strategic objectives to decisions on the technology side. And make sure that that is a continuous effort for different people in the organization. I can tell you from my own experience, at times we involved the right people, but at times we didn't involve everyone that we should have. And so we had to go back and make sure that we were at least talking the same language before we continued our journey forward.
Luis, what a great conversation. And I think we shared a lot of best practices and insights here. Again, from my perspective, this is really a journey that we're all embarking on, and skills are really going to be dominant, as we go into the future. Thank you for your time today, everyone. Have a great event. Thank you.